In this episode of the Physical Education Podcast, we're going to talk about health, what it is, how do we define it, what are the objective and subjective standards that we can use to assess health, and most importantly, the distinction between health and fitness. A lot of what we hear is based around fitness, and we're going to look at how focusing on fitness can actually impair your health. So check it out. So welcome to today's episode. As I said, there is this really important distinction between fitness and health, and they're sort of thought of as one and the same, and they do certainly go hand in hand, but they are different, and it's important. It's very, very important to understand that distinction, because a lot of what is put out online, or even from sort of official sources, with regards to health, is influenced by all sorts of other factors, and it's more about fitness than it is about health. And if you're dealing with chronic pain, you're dealing with some sort of chronic health issue, it's very important to understand that distinction, because you can actually do a lot of damage by being, quote, healthy. And I can share some personal experiences with that. But I guess first thing we can do is discuss what is the technical definition of health. This is one I've gotten from the Medical Dictionary. And health is a relative state in which one is able to function well physically, mentally, socially, and spiritually in order to express the full range of one's unique potentialities within the environment in which one is living. So you'll notice in that definition is that there's no mention of a six-pack, there's no mention of abs, of a thigh gap, of your Instagram followers, or juice cleanses, or all that kind of stuff. And I guess maybe that's a bit obvious, but we need to consider that the information that we're getting, the sources that we're following, are going to taint our view of what is reasonable, and that's going to affect our behaviors. But we'll get into that a bit later. So what is good health? What does that look like? So that's a kind of a general overview of it. But what you want, and these are kind of our objective standards, is we want a warm body temperature. So in the previous episode, the previous two episodes, we talked about tracking your body temperature and your pulse. What you should have is that your body is warm, and it generates heat from activity and from eating food. And the way you're going to see this, so an indication of poor health, is going to be often people deal with cold hands and cold feet, poor circulation to the extremities. And so you can kind of think about this sort of core concept that we covered, particularly in the past two episodes, where your body has this pool of energy, and it's always going to be doing its best with what it has. And if it can't cover all of the costs, so like I said, we have a sort of budget. If it can't cover the costs of everything, it's going to focus on the core functions. So this is what you see in a very visual sense, almost, with blood flow. You have blood flow to the extremities, to the hands and feet, even to the tip of your nose. You can notice that there's poor blood flow to these areas because there is essentially a deficit. You don't have the resources to deal with all of that, and those are the least important with regards to the function of your organs. So in times of stress, in times of depleted energy or an inability to use energy, you need to focus on your heart, your lungs, your liver, your brain. And so the energy, the heat, the blood flow has to go there, and it moves away from the extremities, from the hands and the feet and so on. So that's the way you're going to sort of see that in day-to-day life. If you're dealing a lot with cold hands, cold feet, that kind of stuff, these are signs of a sort of lack of health. Now, to really, really understand this, we need to kind of think of health as being very much on this scale, on this spectrum. So there isn't such a thing as, good health and then not good health. There are degrees of it. It's a concept of polarity. They're one and the same. It's just being unhealthy is sort of the lack of health rather than the opposite of health. But these are philosophical discussions. The point is that it's sort of like water. Water can be cold, it can be boiling, but it's water the whole time, and it's just different degrees of temperature. So health, we have different degrees of health. So if you can imagine a ruler and there are centimeter markings, 100 centimeters, we want to be towards that 100 centimeter point and away from that 0 centimeter point. And at that 0 centimeter point, we can imagine that at that point the body will die. Your life ends. And so we want to be trending towards that higher end. But it's not this sort of, you get there and then you're there. There are fluctuations. And you need to kind of think of, like I talked about last week in the previous episode, you have natural cycles with your hormones, and during the night certain hormones will spike, stress hormones. The lack of sunlight means that you're part of the reason why that is the lack of sunlight, lack of activity, of physical activity. Your body temperature will lower, and this is a time of recuperation, but it's also a time of increased stress in a lot of ways to the body. And so you have this natural cycle of body temperature, of overall wellness. So it's on this sort of oscillating cycle, where you eat something, you digest it, you extract energy from the fuel, and you generate heat from using that fuel. And what should happen then is that you have a sort of a boost in your metabolism. You can kind of think of that as a boost in your health. Now suddenly your body has all of these resources to do whatever it needs to do, and then your body's going to burn through those easily available stores of energy, and then the blood sugar is going to drop, and then stress hormones are going to come in, and that's sort of that low point of that oscillation. So the high point is when we're well fed, the energy is there, the body's calm, it's warm, it's feeling strong. And then the low point is sort of that blood sugar drop, which then creates this spike in stress hormones. So this is just a natural cycle. We want to minimize a lot of that. We want to minimize unnecessary drops in blood sugar. But we talked as well about how you want to eat. You want to allow that to digest. You want to allow that process to take place, and then have your next meal. So we're not looking to be constantly eating, because that's going to create its own issues. But the point being is there is this natural cycle, this oscillating. So we want to be aiming for that high point on the ruler, on the scale of health, but we're never going to be stuck at that one point. So it's not like we're going to attain perfect health and then that's it and we constantly have it. It's this continuous effort, and on a moment to moment basis, essentially we are always either kind of swinging, sort of away from optimal health or back towards optimal health. So that's really to drive home the point that it's a process. You don't eat well once and then you've attained good health. Health is this long-term effort, and that helps in terms of getting behind this idea of the journey of health, the journey of healing. We tend to want the quick fix. We tend to want the thing, the fix, the thing that's going to click everything back into position. And then when people like myself are talking about, you need to engage with this over time, and this is going to take likely a lifetime, and in some cases that can be kind of off-putting, but it's not so much that to say that you sort of know this already. You know that you're going to have to keep eating well every day. You know that health doesn't end, the moment you've eaten broccoli or whatever. That's a bad example, but it doesn't end the moment you've eaten something healthy. You continuously do that. You continuously eat well, sleep well, hydrate, and look after everything. So there is this continuous effort, and there is going to be this natural oscillation. So like a pendulum swinging based on what's going on internally. We're either swinging towards good health or then away from it. And what we want is for those pendulum swings, those oscillations, to be as small as possible. So what we want is that even when you're swinging away from, ideal health, things aren't getting that bad. So when I haven't eaten, when I'm feeling hungry, and when I have a drop in blood sugar and a surge in stress hormones, it doesn't disrupt my life. It doesn't disrupt my ability to cope with the demands of life too significantly. I can recognize that it's not ideal, but it's not completely disrupting my day-to-day life. And so the way you're going to see this in your own life is when you have flare-ups. So it could be, for me, a huge thing was nutrition. I found that with nutrition, if I did nutrition right, I could significantly improve my condition. And if I did nutrition wrong, I could cripple myself within a matter of days, and it would take even longer then to undo that. And so within the matter of a certain meal, and then maybe another meal, and then maybe a bad night's sleep, I'm significantly regressing. And we want to get to a point where that doesn't happen. So the oscillation there between the best that I can manage at that time and my lowest state is quite significant. So I get to a point where, and I'll use myself as an example, I got to a point where I could be pain-free, but also I knew precisely what I could do to inflict the pain on myself again. And you don't necessarily, you don't do this stuff on purpose, but particularly with food, you eat foods that usually these are foods that are delicious, but they're bad for you, and they were particularly bad for me. I responded very poorly to them. But sometimes you slip up, or you say, sure, I'll be fine, and then it kind of catches up on you. But we want, that was my example, and we want these variations to be as small as possible. And you'll likely have a sense of what that is for you. What are your low points? What are your high points? Is there a major gap between that? And so we not only want to get you up that scale, we want to get you resilient to those flare-ups. So where I am now is that I can actually get away quite a bit with eating poorly. Now it will catch up to me, and that's just a reality, because if you eat poorly, you're going to feel poorly. But I've built the resilience and healed sufficiently over time that I have that adaptability. And this is what good health is. That's a characteristic of good health. It's adaptability. It's the ability to handle various demands on your body. And so the way you can kind of reflect on that and how where you might be, where you can kind of get a sense of where you are on the scale, is that how much you need to rely on things like a routine or a structure that's sort of external to yourself, that's not imposed on you. So in times of significant stress, it can be hugely beneficial for someone to have a routine or to be accountable to someone else. So you show up to a job and you just do the job, and you're told precisely what to do, and you just do it. And you're doing it because you don't want to let down your employer or your co-workers or that kind of thing. And if you didn't have that structure, that external thing that's put in place for you to follow, you would then have to consider, well, I need to do this, and then I need to manage my time, and then I'll have to do that. And it's essentially a lot more work. It's like, being self-employed versus showing up to work. You know what you have to do. When you get to clock out, you don't need to do any these other peripheral things. And what these other peripheral things are they require more energy. It requires more mental effort and physical effort to contend with all that. And so if you reflect on your own life, are there times where, or is it just a general trend that you find you do much better with a routine, with having everything laid out for you. And that's a really common one, because it's very hard to stay on top of healthy habits and that kind of thing. And you might notice that when you have some sort of additional structure that you don't have to put in place, so that could be a job, your routine of your job, that's a good indication that you're not at that ideal point yet where you can thrive and be productive and do everything you need to do regardless of any other motivation to do it. So you're only ever doing things for yourself, and you're managing to do that. So that's something I noticed for myself. So I want to be clear that I don't see myself as being at the top of this scale of health. I see myself as being very much on this journey towards there, and certainly, closer to that point than I am to the unhealthy point. But we're all on this journey, we're all on the scale, and it's not to talk about this from my high horse. But yeah, you want to get a sense of where you are. And that brings up this idea of the scale, kind of brings up an important thing to consider, is that when we're getting health advice and when we're assessing what we should be doing for our health, we're often looking at people who seem to have it figured out, people who seem to be very healthy. And the example I always use is Joe Rogan. So Joe Rogan is a major source of health information for a lot of people. He certainly appears to be healthy. He's certainly a person with a high level of fitness, and you get the sense that he's a very healthy person. And I'm not saying he isn't, but I think there are a few things that we need to pick apart and really, really figure out what's going on. I think a lot of people are healthy in spite of the things that they're doing. So again, if we think back to this scale idea, you can have people who, you can call it genetics, you can call it whatever it is, but maybe for their entire life they've had good genetics, they've had a good upbringing, they've had good resources, and they've had next to no lasting injuries or illnesses. So their body hasn't been challenged a huge amount, and they're also in a position where they're very able to tolerate stress. Now, if you've handled a lot of trauma of various sources growing up or over your life, your ability to handle stress decreases. So these people, I suspect, have basically lived maybe a very blessed life, and that's great. This isn't to look down on them. This is brilliant. This is what we should all hope to experience. But these people are just naturally, or by virtue of their life experiences, are naturally very healthy, because their health hasn't had an opportunity or reason to deteriorate over time. And I think they will get away with doing things that are unhealthy because they are towards this high level of health. They are towards the top end of that scale. And so they can get away with doing things that aren't actually healthy. And you'll likely know this in some people. And again, I talked about it in the past 2 episodes, but certain people who just seem to bounce back, or seem to never really have any major issues, or they never seem to put on weight, they can eat whatever they want, and they have this very robust metabolism, very good resilience to stress, and also likely a very low amount of historical stress or historical damage to their body. And so these people are naturally healthy, or naturally have this appearance of health. And so we take them as sort of examples of what good health is, and we might attribute certain qualities to certain actions that aren't that don't make sense. So I'm sort of rambling. I'll use a specific example. Again, Joe Rogan. I haven't listened to him in a while, but as far as he's recently been very much into low carbohydrate diets. He does cold exposure, that kind of thing. And these are all actually extremely stressful to the body, and they're not going to give you benefits really, other than making you more resilient to those specific stresses. So I would argue, and I can point you in the direction of various arguments on this, but that low carbohydrate diets, cold exposure, intense exercise are actually not healthy for the body. They don't promote health. They are stress promoting, and because of that they promote the ability to withstand that specific stress, but they don't promote health. But we look at someone like Joe Rogan, and he, as much as I'm criticizing this, I would say he's probably a reasonably healthy person. He seems healthy, but what are the other aspects of his life that we're not considering? So you're thinking, I want to be healthy, I like Joe Rogan, I want to be like Joe Rogan. Well, he eats elk meat, he doesn't eat carbs, he maybe does cold baths or cold showers, or whatever it is, and he does really intense exercise. So I want to do that. And you might do all those things and run yourself into the ground and have huge flare-ups of health issues, or create new health issues. And again, it's this idea that if you have this scale, Joe Rogan is perhaps on the top of that scale, and you're further down, further away from health on that scale. And these activities are actually unhealthy. They're highly stressful to your body. You can't get away with it because you don't have the prerequisite health or stress resilience or adaptability in your body to do that. Joe Rogan does, for whatever reason, and so he gets away with it, and he then is healthy in spite of those actions. And beyond that, we also need to consider what else might be going on in Joe Rogan's life that is allowing him to be healthy. So you have to consider, well, he is extremely wealthy. He has multiple sources of income. So were he to lose one job, or his podcast to go up in flames, or his UFC job, or his comedy, the point is he has multiple sources of income. So if one of them falls apart or whatever, he's always going to have money. And at this point, I can imagine that he has more money than he's ever going to need. But, he has financial stability, multiple sources of income that are, I think, all profitable and all fairly safe. He does work that he loves. So he gets to talk to people, he gets to commentate on fights, he gets to tell jokes, he gets to go hunting. These are kind of, dream things that you would want to be able to do. And I mean, they're the major things. Like he has this hugely, what I would assume is a hugely nourishing, satisfying life. And it's not trying to take that away from him. That's brilliant. I'm delighted for him. It's great to see someone succeed in that way. But when people are saying, well, Joe Rogan, he looks healthy, I want to be like Joe Rogan, they're focusing on, well, the elk meat and the high intensity running up hills and the keto and the whatever else, and they're maybe missing this other stuff that might be really a far more important part of it, or it might be why he's getting away with this other stuff. So you see this a lot. With, I guess, health and fitness influencers, people who are held as authorities or held as examples of good health and fitness. And a lot of what they do is extremely stressful and demanding. So they tend to eat low-calorie diets, they tend to eat low-carb diets, they tend to eat vegan diets sometimes. They tend to do high-intensity exercise. They tend to do a lot of cold exposure. So all of the popular health and fitness trends at the moment, be it keto, low-carb, intermittent fasting, veganism, cold exposure, the Wim Hof method, just swimming in the ocean, sitting in an ice bath, or cold thermogenesis, you go into a cryo chamber. All these things, these are the kind of the hugely popular, I guess you could call them health fads at the minute, and these are all extremely stressful to your body. And that is going to work against health. That's just the reality. They're hugely taxing on your body. And like I covered in the past 2 episodes, if you're dealing with a chronic health issue, you are by definition dealing with a chronic stress issue. And the last thing you want to do is to add unnecessary stress. So jumping into the freezing Irish Sea is unnecessary stress. I love doing that. I love swimming in the sea, but I understand that it's actually not that healthy for me. It's invigorating. It's like an adrenaline rush. But in terms of restoring good health, it's not good at that because your body is stressed. Your body is struggling to heal things, struggling to function properly, and now you're jumping into freezing ocean where if you don't get out of that, you will die. You will die of hypothermia. So if you go into an ice bath, if you jump into the ocean, into the Irish Sea, probably most seas, I don't know how warm they get, but you will die. You will die either of drowning or you will die from the cold. So these are extremely stressful demands on your body, and that's why they feel so good, because your body is thrown into this fight or flight scenario, and you get this surge of cortisol and adrenaline, these stress hormones, to help you survive, to help you get out of that position. And that's extremely invigorating, and it feels great. It's like going on a roller coaster. There is this surge of adrenaline, and that feels really good. And that kind of, I think, nicely illustrates the distinction between health and fitness. So health is the body being healthy, the body being able to cope with the demands of life and to be able to self-regulate. So the body's ability to convert fuel into energy and to then use that energy to cover everything that it needs to do to maintain proper functioning of all bodily functions. That is health. And fitness is your ability to cope with certain stresses. So are you fit enough to handle such and such? Are you fit enough to handle cold exposure? And at some point, they kind of do tend to go hand in hand in a lot of ways, to a certain point. But in other ways, it can be completely at odds. So when you're in poor health, doing things that are going to add a lot of fitness is going to work against you. And this is why you have people like ultramarathon runners or marathon runners who suddenly just drop dead. And you kind of think to yourself, well, or, you know, someone who might have known this person would say, but they were so healthy. You know, they ran marathons all the time. They were always jogging. They were so healthy. So how did they drop dead? But my point would be, you know, to put it, better to do it in this abstract sense, so you're not making someone feel bad. But, you know, the point there is that this person isn't healthy, because if you're healthy, you don't suddenly drop dead, you know, unless you're like 105 and you go peacefully in the night. You don't suddenly drop dead of a heart attack if you're healthy, but you can have a high level of fitness and you can have this ability to tolerate running 26 miles or whatever it is, and then you have the ability to tolerate 28 miles and more, and you're basically sort of numbing your body's response to that stress and to that pain. So it's not that you're necessarily getting stronger, and this is a more controversial idea around this idea that stress makes you stronger. I think a more accurate thing to say is that stress makes certain challenges less painful. So it makes you more able to cope with the pain and stress of a certain thing, in the sense that if I jump into an icy cold ocean and I can last 2 minutes, if I keep doing that, I'm going to be able to last 3 minutes. And it's not because I'm getting healthier, it's because I'm getting numb to that stress and that pain, and you're less sensitive to it, so you can last longer. And you get to a point where you're continuously stressing the body and challenging it, and it's less able to perceive that threat. It's just kind of coping with it. It's just, or not even coping, it's just kind of numbing it and getting on with things. And what you have then are these seemingly healthy people who drop dead on a marathon or whatever it is. But it's very important to understand that health is generally not what's being talked about online and all these popular resources and people. What we're talking about most of the time is fitness, is how can you do a little bit more? How can you go without eating a little bit longer? How can you survive on fewer carbs? How can you survive on fewer calories? All of the major trends are around deprivation and challenging the body in ways that are outside of necessity. Your body doesn't require the challenge of being in ice cold water. And this is when we get into the subjective aspect of health. So what I'm saying now is that objectively, going to ice water is, there might be some benefits, but I would say it's going to be a net negative broadly in terms of your body's ability to convert fuel into energy and then to use that energy to take care of all bodily functions for the purposes of maintaining your health. So again, for the purpose of health and your body's ability to remain healthy, jumping into an ice cold ocean is unlikely to have a net positive effect. With all of this, you need to consider, well, what does it mean to me to be healthy? So I can talk all day about, well, you need your body temperature to be this and your pulse to be within this range, and you need to be able to get a 9 hours of sleep undisturbed and feel rested, and all these things that we kind of get about health. But you need to kind of determine for yourself how much of this applies to me. So the example I tend to use with sort of rehabilitation is that the way we rehabilitate a joint or a body is fairly consistent. There are standards across the board, but if you are an Olympic athlete, or if you are a 70-year-old grandfather who wants to enjoy their retirement and be able to play with their grandchildren, the biomechanics, the whatever, how we create good health or good function in joints is essentially the same, but how much does that matter to you? Do you need to maximize every little bit? Do you need to fine tune everything perfectly, or do you just need to be able to get on with your life? So with any of this information, I want to be sort of as clear as possible that this is what we want to do ideally, but you need to decide for yourself, well, do I really need to go down this rabbit hole of fine-tuning the nutrition to this extent? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe you don't care enough, and that's fine. Maybe you're not an Olympic athlete, or maybe you're not hoping to live to 150. Maybe you just want to feel a little bit better and be able to, go about your day without aches and pains. So again, if we think about, and we'll take Joe Rogan as the example again, I could have this discussion with him and say, well, what you're doing actually isn't healthy, but so what? Maybe that's just the way he wants to live his life. Maybe he gets something else from that is this more intangible personal thing. So I could say, well, technically speaking, you shouldn't go on a long elk hunt and sleep in the wilderness and the cold because that's stressful to your body, and you shouldn't go long periods of time without having a proper meal, and all these things are stressful to your body and technically unhealthy. But he's getting all of this other nourishment from that experience in the same way. Like I said, I can recognize that jumping into the Irish Sea isn't actually that healthy, but I love doing it. There's something really invigorating about that, and I can recognize that part of that might be an adrenaline rush, but there's something more that I get from that, from going to the beach, from being in nature. And nature is hugely important to me and valuable to me. And so I can recognize that it's not ideal in the sense of if we want to make health as perfect as possible, but in terms of the overall enjoyment of my life and actually not being too neurotic about all this stuff, this is acceptable. So you need to consider that. And also, if we can take then a more specific example, like if you're a coast guard, if you're whatever it is, and maybe you're a fisherman, having that resilience to cold weather, to cold water is going to be very important. And yes, it's going to come at the cost maybe of your health to some extent, but it's going to make you better able to cope with your job, and maybe that's actually going to save you. So we need to think about this in a nuanced way and in an individualized way. And then that kind of brings up this larger discussion of, you have the sort of ebb and flow of, you hear a lot about this nowadays, and it's I forget the exact quote, but basically it's hard times make strong men make good times make weak men. And so it's this, if life is too good, then we become soft, and if we're soft, things turn bad, and then we're soft and we can't deal with things being bad. So there is this balance that you need to strike between, recognizing that you're probably not going to have to survive the zombie apocalypse. You're probably not going to have to survive nights out in the cold without shelter, without food, without clothing. You're probably never going to have to deal with that. And so should you even bother building that sort of resilience? But is there value in having that capacity? Knowing that you can tolerate certain challenges and maybe the character that comes from that, and knowing your limits. So there's this very complex discussion, not to have with anyone else really, but to have with yourself, and to consider what does health mean to me? What does fitness mean to me? So I'm all about health ahead of fitness. I would say health is my main concern, but also I'm always somewhat wondering about the zombie apocalypse or whatever it is, or even something that might actually happen with COVID and everything. Am I going to be able to grow my own food? Am I going to be able to do these various things? Am I going to be sufficiently resilient to get through that? And that is important to me because of, I guess, my personality and whatever it is. And that investigating that can tell you a lot about yourself, and knowing yourself, again, is going to feed back into this whole process of, if I need to heal, I need to understand who I am and what I need to heal. It's interesting. I find this stuff fascinating, but I think basically the main point that I want to really drive home is that there is such a thing as objective health. So objectively, you should have, and I'll actually list this off. So you should have a good body temperature in that range of 36.5 to 37 degrees Celsius. You should have a pulse range of about 75 to 85, and this isn't accounting for physical activity just on a day-to-day basis. Your skin tone, your skin should appear in good health. No rashes, no eczema, pimples, that kind of thing. Bowel movements, for example, there should be, at the very least, one bowel movement per day, but I think you want to aim for one bowel movement for each major meal of the day. So maybe 3, you could have up to 5 bowel movements in a day, and also how it comes out the other end. You'll be able to tell if it's towards the healthier side of things. But we want that. We want healthy bowel movements. We want efficient digestion. We want a healthy libido. And that's something that can be interesting, like a complete loss of libido, and then also on the opposite end, a hyperactive libido. So we want something that's sort of in that in between, that's regular, it's manageable, it's not all consuming, and something that you have some degree of control over. Good sleep, so having a sleep routine, going to sleep at consistent times, sleeping through the night, waking up feeling rested, waking up and feeling like you can get on with your day, and you're not one of those people who's who can't do anything until they've had their coffee, that kind of stuff. Having dreams also, as far as I've seen, is a sign of good energy balance. So when you restore sleep, when you restore energy balance, you might begin to dream again, or remember your dreams, or have more vivid dreams. And again, you can kind of think of this as when everything is functioning well and we have energy available, we can begin to do these other kind of more superficial things, these things that go beyond immediate survival. So having dreams again, or having more vivid dreams, or remembering your dreams better, that's going to be a positive sign. A lack of intense cravings. So when everything is working well, when you're feeding your body the right way and in sufficient amounts, what you'll find is that you don't tend to have crazy cravings for food. You might have I think I'd like a steak tonight, versus I need to eat the whole packet of biscuits or the entire cake. These very, very intense cravings are showing a significant sign of lack in the body, and as health improves, you won't really get those intense cravings. And that's something I've found in the past couple of years, that I don't, I get hungry, I crave food generally, in the sense that, well, I'm hungry now, I need to eat something, but I don't get these crazy, I need to absolutely eat everything. And a lot of that is just you're under eating, and then it catches up to you, and then it's the evening, or it's the end of the week, and you just go all out, and you seem to undo all of your hard work. But the point there is that you're under eating. So as you become healthier, you will have fewer of these really intense cravings, and you'll just have general cravings for food, or certain things, like maybe a bit more salt or something a bit sweet, but nothing really significant. Another sign then of an objective sign of good health is a positive state of mind. So being able to feel good, feel happy, being able to see the positives. So seeing things negatively is, we have this negativity bias, and it's survival based bias, where if we can be aware of the negatives, we're more likely to survive whatever whatever life might throw at us. So it's like this kind of protective pessimism, and being able to think positively, and being able to look at things objectively and not get caught up in them, is a sign of good energy balance and good available energy. It's also, some of that is also just a mental skill, learning how to think critically and think rationally, but a lot of that is also, do you have the energy required to do higher order thinking? So if you're always negative, and you're always reacting to things and knee-jerk reactions, and you're outraged by everything, that's very sort of reflexive, automatic, stressful thinking. That it doesn't require much thought, it's more reactive. And sort of higher order thinking, being able to see something that maybe is outrageous, or maybe is shocking, or whatever it is, and there's no shortage of that, and being able to just observe it and say, okay, so that's what I'm seeing, what about this angle, what about these perspectives, and that's tremendously important nowadays, and it seems to be tremendously lacking. But that is going to be a sign of good health, is your ability to just observe and not get caught up in something tremendously emotional. The next thing would be easy digestion. So when you're eating, You should be able to digest food easily. You shouldn't have acid reflux or bloating or anything like that. The food should go in. Ideally, it should be the optimal fuel, which we covered in the past couple of episodes. And the machinery of your body should be healthy enough that it can handle that, convert that fuel into energy, and then your body uses that energy and generates heat. So easy digestion is going to be a major part of what good health looks like and feels like. And then being generally lean. So this is, again, we tend to have these unrealistic standards based on what we see in various media, and there's this emerging movement over the past few years where you can be healthy at any size, and the truth is somewhere in between, in that good health doesn't really tend to be like this really low body fat percentage where you can see all the veins and you can see every little detail, like bodybuilding shows where they've just got incredibly low levels of body fat. That isn't healthy. But equally, obesity is not healthy. It's just not. Now you can be a little bit overweight and have a bit of extra weight, and that can be perfectly fine, and that's going to get into how much do you care about this? Do you care to have this specific physique, or do you care more about function and health? And you need to kind of play around with that. And you might find that you feel a bit better and everything else works a bit better when you have a little bit of extra weight on your body. But the general trend is what we're going to see, is that when everything is optimized and everything is working well, your body doesn't have a huge amount of excess fat because it feels safe and it doesn't need it. And it'll always have some, even people who are super lean always have some, but that this kind of, sort of average looking. So the reality isn't that far from what we kind of assume. But it's worth considering that it's okay to have that extra bit of weight, and that's not a sign of poor health. It's only in those really, morbid obesity where it physically affects you. But the point is, these are the objective aspects of health, and then from there you need to consider, well, how much does this mean to me? What am I, maybe it means a lot to me to be a bodybuilder, and maybe I'd recommend to kind of investigate that. Well, what is that rooted in? Are there any insecurities there that you might be better off addressing those versus pursuing what is, ultimately quite an unhealthy goal. But the point is recognizing the objective aspects of good health, and then taking the individual. What are your subjective goals? What is it that you're looking to achieve? What is it that's important to you in life? So for me, I don't want to be neurotic about food. I want to be able to enjoy food. I want to be able to like food, but I also want to be able to be physically capable. If I need to run off on a moment's notice, if I need to climb up a wall, if I need to survive, go up a mountain, whatever, stuff like that, that's important to me as well. So, there's a balancing act there of kind of eating a little bit of what I want and not worrying about it too much, but I also eat good foods, and I'm still on this journey, so I need to, I'm still healing to some degree, so I'm allowing myself a bit more than maybe I need. But I'm finding that balancing act where I'm still physically capable, I'm able to do the things that I need to do, but I'm also allowing myself to eat whatever I want, essentially, but it ends up still being foods that are actually quite healthy. And that's maybe a topic for another day, but what you'll find is that as you change, as you understand all of this information, as you begin to change the way you eat and the way you feel, eating healthily it's just what you do. It's not this effort. Again, that's that point of embracing the journey and recognizing that it's not about eating a healthy thing once. It's about engaging with the process and understanding that you're always going to have this oscillation, and we just want to get to a point where we're generally trending towards optimal health as much as possible, and the oscillations are very manageable. And when things are really, really bad, so you might experience something extremely stressful, we've built up the resilience that we can recover to our rough resting point more easily. An example for that would be like Jordan Peterson or Michaela Peterson. If you've ever heard them talk about dealing with their joint issues, and Michaela Peterson's joint issues or Jordan Peterson's mental health issues, I'll talk about Jordan Peterson. He can improve his mental state significantly with very strict diet, but if he slipped up, he had a flare up, and it would last a couple of months before he recovered. So what we want is, and what should happen to Jordan Peterson as his health improves, is that if he does ever slip up, the flare up isn't as significant, and the recovery from that is far quicker. And what I would say, again, to this point of it's the distinction between health and fitness, and what health truly is that what Jordan Peterson is doing there with avoiding vegetables and eating a low carb, just all meat diet, is that he's not really, it's an avoidance strategy rather than a healing strategy. Now hopefully a certain amount of healing is going to occur underneath, but that's you have a problem, probably a bacteria, a gut bacteria problem that's really, really harsh, and he's avoiding that by eating or living in a way that doesn't really influence the gut bacteria. But what we would want, or what I would suspect, is that as long as he does that, he's never going to get to this ideal point. What we would want then is to heal the machinery of the body where he's able to tolerate these foods and thrive on a broader range of foods, on a more inclusive diet, like I talked about in the past couple of episodes. And he doesn't have flare-ups from those foods. And if he does ever have flare-ups, because maybe he's going to eat something that he's really going to indulge and eat things that he just shouldn't be eating, things that just aren't healthy for anyone. If he does have a flare-up, then that is going to be a far more moderate flare-up that he's going to recover from far quicker. So hopefully that kind of explains that scale of health, and how we're all somewhere on that scale, and we're all constantly oscillating back and forth within an average daily range of being slightly closer to good health and slightly away from good health. So our low points, our higher points, and how they correspond with various hormones. Stress hormones being high, we're going to be at our lower point. Lacking food, we're going to be at our lower point. But we want to get a sense of how big those oscillations are, and then where we are on that scale. So do we have flare-ups very easily, or are we quite resilient when we do things that we shouldn't do? And that's going to help you navigate the world of health a bit better and make it a bit more individual, so that you can look at someone like Joe Rogan, you can say, okay, he's doing that, maybe I should do that, or say, actually maybe I shouldn't do that, because maybe he's getting by in spite of that. Maybe his life is so good and his other aspects of his life are so good that he can get away with doing the cold exposure or the low carb or whatever it is. And so you see the whole picture, and maybe you're in a job that you don't love and you're dealing with chronic stress issues. You're not going to do the exact same thing that Joe Rogan is doing, where he is working in a job that he loves with complete financial freedom, and so on. So all of these factors are relevant, and yeah, we need to recognize that. So that roughly covers it. I think I'm just going to wrap up, because otherwise I'm just going to ramble on forever. So hopefully that makes sense. Any questions, you can let me know. Anything that I mentioned, any resources, they will be in the show notes, and I will see you in the next episode. Have a great day.